Well, as the search for workable systems of democracy that delivers in Africa continues, we are now joined by Obi Ezekwesili, founder, Fix Politics and School of Politics, Policy and Governance. Thank you so much, Dr. Obi Ezekwesili, for joining us on Newsnight.
Thank you so very much.
Great. So if I understand what this program was about today is that Africa shouldn't keep importing systems that don't work. Then my question would be, what does a homegrown system look like? Are we still talking about democracy?
We are still talking about we're still talking about democracy. The reason that you had the concept of indigenizing democracy is that in the current realities of our global system, it has become clear that democracy faces a crisis of credibility. And because we are in that space now, there's a lot of intellectual interrogation of what kind of political system would actually work for different communities and regions of people. And so it is an opportunity for us as Africans to actually face the facts of how much we have really worried about the disconnect between the democracy properly so-called, and what it is that we have practiced. And I am one of those who's always insisted that we've practiced democracy, whether it's, even they talk about liberal democracy, we've practiced it in the breach. And so because we've practiced it in the breach, it's often the case that whether it's the principle or the practice of it, there is a gap in terms of what it has produced, whether you measure it in terms of political freedoms, you mention it in terms of adherence to the rule of law, to respect for the Constitution on the basis of constitutionalism as the bedrock of democracies that work. Or you measure it in terms of the governance process and what it delivers in the welfare of the people. Every government, whether a rich society or a poor society, is supposed to exist with a simple leitmotif, which is the purpose for its being. It is to improve the quality of life of citizens. So because that is not happening in our region, our continent, people who have even been through autocracies are suddenly thinking, oh, this isn't working, so perhaps there is something that is wrong with us. Well, what is wrong with us is the fact that we have failed to practice the principles that we actually once had. And that was the basis of Frank Nweke's speech as a keynote speaker at the conference this year, that indigenous Africa had systems of accountability, systems of participation, systems of equity and inclusion that enabled democracy to work within the communes that we existed in. And so perhaps in this season, when the whole world is interrogating democracy, it is opportunity also for us to step back and to come back to the design table and think of how we would tinker with existing paradigms in order to fashion a pathway that leads us to governance, good governance and development.
Right. I mean, and some would ask, really, I mean, is the problem really with democracy or the practitioners of democracy, especially when you talk about Africa and indeed Nigeria? And let's talk about these pathways that you mentioned. What exactly are the new pathways for governance that truly can deliver, whether in Africa or indeed Nigeria?
So more and more, there is a conversation, even globally, that is questioning how citizens suddenly became marginal to democracy. Democracy has been captured. Democracy has been captured by the powerful. In most societies where democracy, exists, democratic governments exist. And that marginalization of the citizens did not just happen because some powerful people took over democracy. It happened gradually. People over time realized that it just didn't matter what they did as citizens. Somehow, the reciprocity of a social contract with the state was failing them. So what do you think they did? They simply just voted off democracy. And so citizens who are supposed to be the core of the democratic process are no longer engaged in that process. And therefore, there is state capture going on around in democracies. And so the way that people are beginning to talk about it is to find systems that would bring the citizens back at the center of the democratic process. Because everyone realizes that there is that level of freedom that is necessary in order for societies to flourish in innovation, to flourish in the freedoms that lead to innovation, because innovation is the basis of advancement of society. And so the citizens' part of correcting democracy is really under a lot of engagement. And then there is the other part, which is that the democracy stopped functioning well because it got corrupted. It got corrupted, whether it's the developed societies in their own case, sophisticated ways of corrupting the democratic processes exist. Firms are able, corporatism has managed to infect the democratic processes so policies can be purchased. In the societies that are less advanced, what you find is that impauperization of the population. So the people are so poor, therefore they have entered into a space where they rationally think that the only thing they can get out of democracy is to sell their most important property right, which is the right to vote into office people who would lead them. So you've got a situation where the political class is a mess. You've got a situation where the citizens have entered into a state of powerlessness, learned helplessness, as it were, and then you've got to a place where the regulatory system within which the electorate and the political class interact is captured by the political class. Because they are captured by the political class, you see what massive mess we have these days. The INEC, as an umpire, as an electoral umpire, is compromised. They don't have this, the trust of society. The judiciary has also engulfed itself in these political shenanigans. And so when you have this kind of a complex situation, you've got to, there's nobody today who has a perfect solution for what could be that pathway, which is why our theme talks about exploring pathways. And in exploring pathways, it's important to go back to historical activities that shaped the way that societies once governed themselves. And Weke was able to, in his speech, tell us of the many instances across this country, whether in the southwest or the southeast or the south-south or even in the north, where there are systems of governance that existed that, at least in most of the cases, were accountable systems, participatory systems, systems that punished bad behavior, systems that actually defined the common good and got everybody included in the decision-making processes of determining the outcomes and the welfare of everyone.
So, Ezekwesili, you really paint a picture of crisis. But let me ask you, how much of these, solutions that you profile are idealism, and how much of it is actually politically deliverable? And I ask you because if you say that it's been captured, then surely those who benefit from it will be resistant to change. So how realistic is it?
Your question is very, very solid question. So the whole question of the realism of attempting to do something that corrects the distortions that we have in our democratic process or processes is almost a state of mind where we kind of think we can't do anything about this. And that's the same learned helplessness. But every society that finds itself in this kind of a situation where it knows that if it continues on the path it is on, it leads to nowhere. It's a journey to nowhere. You're going to have dismal, miserable outcomes because there's nothing that you look at in data that now will tell you that by continuing to do the same thing, you would get a different outcome. It's actually said by Einstein to be the definition of madness. Now, because that is the case, it means that you must take a risk. The worst thing you can do in a dire situation is to, in fact, the most dangerous thing to do is to not take the risk of trying to question your condition and to figuring out the ways that you can correct. And so when citizens boldly embrace the fact that they can question the status quo and that they can imagine possibilities, it should not at all be something that is excoriated. It should be something that is welcomed. It should be something that every citizen should be interested in. Because what's the alternative? There's the alternative to stay with that which is distorted. So the realism comes into the fact that we actually see that things can work. Let's take, for example, the abdication of politics by those who would engage the political system with character, with competence, and capacity. It was never something that we spent time discussing. Now we're discussing that. That's progress. The next thing that would follow is how then do we build this class of people? It requires very intentional design of programs of production of a different set of minds that begin to act on a scaled basis with the deliberateness of building a new political culture. We are the dominant political culture that subordinates the common good, the public welfare for private interest. That is not our destiny. We can challenge that. And so when we then say that there is a way to create those kinds of designs, because they once existed in other societies that even have lost their ways. So we have a school, for example, of politics, policy, and governance, which is well designed and which has unconventional curriculum. It is training people to be ethical, to be people with cognition, the kind of range of knowledge they must have. It is training them to be people with capacity. Right. And on the basis of that, what we have seen is that even in the 2023 elections, by the time we had only produced about 320 people out of our program, 55 of them picked up forms to run for election for the first time. Those are the kinds of baby steps that you follow to correct distortions.
Baby steps, very, very important. Educate the people first, enlighten them, then they have the capacity to take the right decisions, especially when it comes to the polls. Dr. Obi Ezekwesili, founder of Fixed Politics and School of Politics, Policy and Governance. Thank you so much for your brilliant submissions tonight on Newsnight.